The reservation confirmation glowed on my phone screen like a promise I desperately needed to keep. Ferraro's, 8 p.m., party of one, 7 minutes late. My pulse hammered as the hostess led me through the dimly lit restaurant, all exposed brick, candlelit tables draped in burgundy linens, and the kind of quiet that only comes when a place knows how to keep secrets. I'd been saving for 3 months for this dinner. After 2 years of soul-crushing rejection at auditions, 2 years of sleeping on my sister's couch while she made pointed comments about my delusions, I'd finally booked a commercial. Nothing glamorous. A 30-second bit for a pharmaceutical company, playing a woman laughing too hard at her own joke. But it was a credit. Proof I wasn't insane for chasing this dream. Proof I wasn't worthless. So I'd splurged. Ferraro's, the restaurant everyone whispered about. The kind of place where you had to know someone to get a table. Where the chef himself came out to greet the fortunate few. The kind of place that made you feel like you mattered. The hostess gestured toward a booth in the back corner, half hidden by shadow and the curve of a velvet banquette. Your table, Miss Romano. I slid in, exhaling as candlelight flickered across the pristine white tablecloth. The leather smelled like money and promise. To my left, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city in glittering darkness downtown, sprawled beneath us like something conquered and claimed. To my right, the restaurant's interior unfolded. The bar with its amber bottles catching light, the kitchen's faint clatter, the low hum of expensive conversations happening between people who belonged here. I didn't belong here. But for tonight, I could pretend. A water glass appeared. Olive oil. Bread that steamed when I broke it open. The waiter melted away before I could blink, the kind of service that felt like being handled by ghosts. I was 3 pages into the menu when the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But every nerve ending in my body went electric, like I'd touched a live wire and suddenly couldn't let go. The air itself seemed to thicken. Conversations didn't stop exactly, they lowered. The kind of cautious hush that falls when something dangerous enters the room. I kept my eyes on the menu, didn't look up. Something told me that looking up was dangerous. Footsteps, multiple, deliberate. A man's low voice, not quite words, just a murmur of absolute authority, and the sound of chairs scraping back as a table near the window was quietly, efficiently cleared. I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Tall, dark. The kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself because the entire world already knew it was there. My eyes betrayed me. They flickered upward. He was devastating in that particular way that made you understand why people did stupid things for love. Black suit. Expertly tailored. Dark hair swept back from a face that looked carved from marble-sharp cheekbones. A jaw that could cut glass, and eyes the color of storm clouds just before they broke open. Late 30s, maybe. The kind of beautiful that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with control. He sat 3 tables away, directly in my line of sight. And then his eyes found me. And the menu in my hands might as well have burst into flames. Attraction isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's a collision. A moment where your body recognizes danger and decides it wants to run straight into it anyway. His gaze pinned me where I sat, and I felt heat bloom across my chest, spreading upward toward my neck. I forced myself to look back at the menu, but the words swam meaninglessly in front of my eyes. Don't be obvious. Don't be obvious. Don't be obvious. The waiter returned a different one. Older, nervous energy radiating off him in waves. He didn't even glance at me. He moved to the table where Storm Eyes sat, all bowed posture and deference. Mr. Marchetti. Your usual table will be prepared shortly, sir. We had a small the previous guests didn't realize. I see. That voice. God, that voice. Low and soft and absolutely certain. No matter. My hands trembled slightly as I raised my water glass. This was insane. A man. At a restaurant. You didn't feel like this. This wasn't real attraction. This was chemistry gone haywire, pheromones, and the dangerous electricity of a stranger who looked at you like he was trying to solve an equation written on your skin. I should have focused on the scallops, the sea urchin, the $300 bottle of wine the sommelier was hovering near his table with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Instead, I listened. Tell me about her, he murmured to one of his companions. A man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow leaned closer. The girl? The one in the corner. My heart stopped. Genuinely stopped beating for a full 2 seconds. Don't know her, Scar Eyebrow said. Not one of the usual faces. Looks like she's never been here before. Looks like. He paused. Looks like she's here alone. Silence stretched like pulled taffy. Interesting, Mr. Marchetti said softly. Get me her name. I stared at my menu so hard I thought the paper might combust. My cheeks burned. Every muscle in my body had gone rigid. Get my name? Who did that? Who sat 3 tables away from a woman and ordered her name like she was a dish to be studied before consumption? The kind of man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. The kind of man who didn't understand the word no. The waiter materialized again. Apparently I was important enough now to warrant immediate attention, and I ordered the first thing I could pronounce. The branzino. Asparagus. A glass of Pinot Grigio. My voice came out higher than normal. Nervous. Small. When I finally risked another glance, he was watching me over the rim of a glass filled with something dark and expensive. A thin smile played at the corner of his mouth, the kind of smile a predator wears when it's decided its prey is worth the hunt. I looked away. My chest rose and fell too quickly. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. I should have felt violated. This was a violation, wasn't it? His attention was a weight pressing down on me, inevitable as gravity. Instead, I felt alive for the first time in 2 years. The contradiction made me dizzy. My phone buzzed against the table. My sister. A text glowing on the screen. How's the fancy dinner? Don't get too full of yourself, lol. I was typing a response, something sarcastic, something safe, when a shadow fell across my table. Forgive the intrusion. His voice up close was catastrophic, deep and smooth and lined with something dangerous, like honey with razor blades hidden inside. I looked up, and he was standing beside my booth. All 6'3" of him somehow making the crowded restaurant feel like we were utterly alone. I'm Marco Marchetti, he said simply. Not an introduction, a declaration, a claiming of space. This table, it's actually reserved for me every evening, but I find myself enjoying the view from here far more. His eyes dropped to my lips. My mouth went dry. My voice cracked, humiliating. I'm sorry, I didn't know, the hostess said. I know. He slid into the booth across from me, uninvited, with the casual certainty of someone who'd never been told no in his life. His cologne reached me, then something dark and expensive, leather and smoke. Stay. I like you here. It wasn't a request. His security detail had subtly shifted position around the restaurant, and I realized with a jolt of ice-cold clarity that I was being flanked. Surrounded. There would be no leaving easily, no polite escape. I don't even know you, I whispered. Marco Marchetti smiled. And it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. You will, Bella. By the end of this evening, you'll know me very well. And then, he leaned closer, and I could feel the heat radiating off him like an open flame. Then you'll never be able to forget me. Behind him, storm cloud eyes, the distant glitter of the city, and the absolute certainty that my life had just divided into 2 parts, before and after. The dinner was surreal in the way only dangerous moments can be. Matteo ordered for both of us, a presumption so absolute it should have infuriated me. Instead, I found myself sitting in stunned silence as he selected a risotto that turned out to be the most exquisite thing I'd ever tasted. He didn't eat much. He mostly watched me, the way a collector watches something precious he's just acquired. You're wondering who I am, he said, not a question, a statement of fact delivered between bites of his own plate. I know you're someone important, I replied carefully, my fingers tightening around my wine glass. Someone people fear. That's written all over this restaurant. His laugh was low, genuine. It transformed his face in a way that made my breath catch. Fear and respect aren't mutually exclusive, Sienna. Most people conflate them because they've never experienced the difference. He leaned closer, and I caught his scent, expensive cologne, something dark and woody underneath it, and something else, something that smelled like danger. I'm not a person people fear. I'm a man, they obey. Isla had excused herself to the bathroom 20 minutes ago, claiming a migraine. I suspected she'd run. Smart woman. That sounds lonely, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. His expression shifted, a flicker of something raw crossing his features before the mask of control slid back into place. It is, which is exactly why I'm enjoying your company so thoroughly. You're the first person in 7 years who's spoken to me like I'm human, instead of a problem that requires management. The intimacy of that admission, the vulnerability barely hidden beneath the dominance, created a strange intimacy between us. I suddenly understood the danger more clearly. It wasn't the bodyguards or the power or the way the restaurant staff scattered when he glanced at them. The real danger was that he was beginning to feel like something I could reach for. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Matteo's jaw tightened. Get it. he commanded softly. I pulled it from my clutch with trembling fingers. 7 missed calls from a number I recognized immediately. Dominic, my ex-fiancé, the last person I wanted to think about tonight, the last person I wanted intruding on this impossible moment. Your ex, Matteo observed, reading my face like a book. Not a question. How did you... I know things, Sienna. It's part of who I am. He took my phone from my hands and set it face down on the table. He can wait. You're with me now. The possessiveness should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a thrill through my nervous system that I had no business feeling. As dinner progressed, Matteo shared fragments of himself, never quite complete answers, but enough to paint a picture of a man who'd built an empire through ruthlessness and intelligence. He didn't use the word mafia. He didn't need to. The way he spoke about business and family operations and territories made it abundantly clear. The Russo family runs this city. Isla whispered the next morning, her face pale as she showed me her research on her phone. We were in my apartment, in the pale light of dawn, and everything felt like it had happened in a fever dream. Matteo Russo. He's Sienna. He's the head of organized crime in Vesper Bay. He's been linked to... I don't want to know, I interrupted, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. You have to know. People who get close to him disappear, or they die, or they disappear and then... Isla. She fell silent, her eyes searching mine. You're going to see him again. I can see it on your face. I wasn't going to see him again. That was the rational decision, the safe decision, the decision that made sense, which is why I'd written down the number he'd slipped into my hand as we were leaving the restaurant, tucked inside a business card with nothing on it but digits, and the words, "Call me," in handwriting, that was surprisingly elegant for a man who probably ordered murders with the same casual certainty. I waited 3 days. On the 4th day, I called. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting or like the phone was never far from his hand, ready to respond to crises and violence and the 1,000 demands that came with his world. I was beginning to think you were smarter than I'd hoped, he said by way of greeting. Put it on speaker. I need to hear your voice clearly. That's a little controlling, don't you think? Very much so. I'm going to pick you up tomorrow at 6. Wear something black, comfortable but elegant. We're going somewhere private. I haven't agreed to see you. Yes, you have. 3 days ago, when you took my card instead of throwing it away. When you called instead of blocking me. You agreed the moment you looked at me in that restaurant. Sienna, everything after that has just been you, catching up to the decision your body already made. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. But the terrifying part was that he sounded absolutely certain, and that certainty was beginning to convince me that maybe he wasn't. If I'm making a mistake, I started. You are, he interrupted. A catastrophic one. But you're going to do it anyway because you're curious about what it feels like to stand on the edge of a cliff. I'm going to teach you exactly how terrifying that feels, Sienna, and you're going to thank me for it. He hung up. I stood in my apartment, phone still pressed to my ear, heart hammering against my ribs like something trying to escape a cage. Everything Isla had told me screamed that this was madness, that I was walking toward something that could destroy me. But as I moved toward my closet to find something black and elegant, I already knew I was going to keep walking, because the truth was darker and more honest than fear. I wanted to fall. I wanted to see how far down the cliff went before I hit bottom, and Matteo Russo was offering to push me. The penthouse was obscene. It stretched across what felt like an entire floor of a building that probably had only 3 occupied levels, protected by security protocols that made me feel like I was entering a vault instead of someone's home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city lights of Vesper Bay, and the view was so vast it felt like standing at the edge of the world. Matteo had left me here while he took a call. His bodyguards remained outside the apartment, visible through the glass doors, and that was somehow worse than if they'd been inside. It meant I was completely alone with him, completely unavailable to anyone else who might ask where I was. No one knew I was here. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like freedom. I wandered through the space like I was walking through a museum, dedicated to a man I was only beginning to understand. The furniture was modern and expensive, but impersonal, the kind of decoration that came from hiring a designer and saying, "Make me look powerful." It was only when I reached his study that I saw something that felt like truth. Books, everywhere. Philosophy, history, art, poetry. Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment sat spine-cracked on a leather desk, pages marked and annotated in the margins with thoughts in Italian. A complete collection of Dante's works. Shakespeare, Camus, Philosophy texts so dense I had to strain to understand the titles. This was the real penthouse. This room. This was where he lived when nobody was watching. "You like to read," I said when he appeared in the doorway, freshly showered, hair still damp, wearing linen pants and nothing else. My mouth went dry. The scars on his chest told stories I suspected he'd never verbally confirm, pale lines of violence, old injuries that had healed wrong because proper medical attention wasn't an option in his world. "I like to think," he corrected, moving into the space like he was claiming it, like he was claiming everything. "Books are just the vessel. What I'm interested in is understanding how people rationalize the unforgivable, how they justify cruelty, how they convince themselves that love makes the darkness acceptable." "Does it?" I asked quietly. "Does love make the darkness acceptable?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying me like I was one of his annotated texts. "Come here." I could have refused. We both knew I could have. But I crossed the space between us because I'd already decided, 3 days ago in my apartment, that I was going to stop pretending this wasn't happening. He cupped my face in his hands, and for the first time, I saw beneath the armor of control. His hands were trembling slightly. His eyes were unfocused, like he was looking at something beyond me. "I've killed people," he said quietly. "Not for power or money. Sometimes for business, but some for other reasons. Reasons that made sense at the time, and make sense now when I think about them in the dark. I'm not a good man, Sienna. I want you to understand that before—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "Before whatever this is becomes something we can't untangle." "Why did you bring me here?" I whispered. "Because I'm selfish. Because in a world where everything is calculated and controlled, you felt like chaos, like something I couldn't predict or manage or plan for, and I want to know what that feels like. I want to know what you feel like when I stop pretending to be human and just—" He trailed off, and in the silence, I understood what he meant. When he stopped pretending, period, his mouth came down on mine. It wasn't gentle. It was a claiming, a demand, a statement of intent that felt dangerous and necessary at once. I tasted the weight of him expensive whiskey. Something dark, something that tasted like every bad decision I'd ever made, suddenly felt rational. His hands moved to my waist, lifting me against him with the kind of casual strength that reminded me exactly how much danger he represented. I was pressed against his scarred chest, and I could feel his heart heavy and violent beneath my palms. When he pulled back, we were both breathing hard. "I need to show you something," he said hoarsely. "I need to show you what I actually am before you decide whether to stay." He took my hand and led me through the penthouse, down a hallway I hadn't noticed before. Security doors that required biometric locks. Mateo pressed his hand to a panel, and a room emerged like a secret. It was an office, a real one. Not the book-lined study that felt like his soul, but the place where his business actually happened. Monitors displaying security feeds from across the city, a safe behind a portrait of what looked like his father. Papers with names and locations and numbers that probably meant lives and deaths translated into currency. "This is what I am," he said quietly, his hand still holding mine. "This is the reality, not the poetry and philosophy. This is where the money comes from. This is what I do when I'm not seducing art curators in fancy restaurants." I should have been horrified. I should have let go of his hand and walked toward the exit and called the police but I didn't. Instead, I squeezed his hand tighter, looking at the map of Vesper Bay behind his desk, with different territories marked in different colors. "Show me more," I said. "Show me all of it." He turned to face me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that looked like relief. Like he'd been terrified I'd reject him, and my acceptance, my hunger for the truth was somehow more intimate than anything physical could be. "You're going to hate yourself for this," he warned. "I probably am," I agreed. "But I'm going to do it anyway." He kissed me again, and this time it felt like a promise. A dangerous, dark, absolutely catastrophic promise. Neither of us knew yet that keeping it would cost us everything. 2 weeks. That's how long I managed to live in the space between my old life and the life Mateo was pulling me toward. 2 weeks of stolen hours in his penthouse, of learning the geography of scars on his body while he taught me about territories and business and the weight of decisions that ended in violence. 2 weeks before the first threat arrived. It came in the form of Dominic, my ex-fiancé, showing up at the gallery where I worked, looking haggard and afraid in a way I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, pulling me into the back office before my boss could ask questions. Alone. His hands were shaking. His expensive suit was rumpled. Whatever had happened to put this kind of fear in his eyes was something significant enough to override his pride, and Dominic Ashford didn't do vulnerable. "What's wrong?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be about Matteo. Everything was about Matteo now. "You need to stop seeing him," Dominic said without preamble. "Whatever you think is happening, whatever he's told you, you need to end it. Now. You don't get to tell me who to see." "You're right. I don't. But someone else might. Matteo Russo doesn't do casual dating, Sienna. He collects things. And when he's done with them, they're usually—" He stopped, running a shaking hand through his hair. "There's someone, another family, the Delacroix organization. They've been trying to move into Russo's territory, and they're getting desperate. If they find out he's connected to you, if they realize you matter to him," understanding hit me like physical force. "They'll use me. They'll kill you," Dominic corrected flatly. "And they'll make it hurt. I got contacted 3 days ago. Someone wanted information about you, where you live, where you work, your routines. I didn't give them anything, but that doesn't mean they won't find it themselves." The gallery suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. People outside the office were sorting through paintings, living their ordinary lives, and none of them understood that their world was about to splinter. "I need to go," I said. "Go where? To him?" "Sienna, that's exactly where they want you to go. If you're with him when they strike," but I was already moving, already calling Matteo as I grabbed my bag, already making the decision that would change everything. He answered before the phone could ring twice. "I know," he said. "Dominic Ashford showed up at one of my clubs an hour ago. He was worried about you. I respect that, even if I'm going to have to kill him eventually for other reasons." The casual way he said it, "I'm going to have to kill him eventually," should have horrified me. Instead, it felt like a statement of fact, like he'd said, "The sun will rise," with the same tone. "What do I do?" I whispered. "You're going to pack. Essentials only. You're going to tell no one where you're going. And you're going to get to my penthouse in the next hour. After that, you're going to stay very close to me and remember that the scariest thing in Vesper Bay is already in love with you. That makes you the most protected person in this city. In love with you." Those 4 words hung in the air between us, and I realized he'd said them without hesitation, without softness, like they were truth so absolute they didn't require gentleness. "Matteo. 1 hour, Bella. Move." The phone went dead. Getting home without being followed was an exercise in paranoia I didn't know how to execute. I kept checking mirrors, kept feeling eyes on me, kept seeing threats in shadows and strangers. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the lock. I threw clothes into a bag with no organization, no plan. Photos I couldn't replace. My laptop. Money I'd been saving for the gallery's eventual expansion. It took 20 minutes. It felt like hours. I was loading the bag into my car when I noticed the car parked across the street. Engine running. 2 men inside, watching. They weren't subtle about it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tell Russo we have his girlfriend. He wants her back. He needs to surrender territory. He has 48 hours. I made the drive to the penthouse in a state of dissociation, so complete I barely registered traffic lights or turns. By the time I arrived, Matteo's security was already in motion. The building was locked down. Armed men occupied every corridor, every entrance, every possible point of vulnerability. He was waiting for me in the study, surrounded by maps and papers and what looked like strategic planning. When he saw me, he pulled me into his arms with an intensity that bordered on desperate, and for the first time, I saw the version of him that Vesper Bay feared. "They're moving faster than I anticipated," he murmured into my hair. "The Delacroix family thinks you're leverage. They're wrong. You're not leverage, Sienna. You're the reason I'm about to start a war that's going to paint this city red. I didn't mean to." "Shh, you didn't do this. I did when I decided you were worth the cost." He pulled back just far enough to look at me, his dark eyes burning with something that was part fury, part devastation. "They want to play with fire? I'll show them what inferno looks like." Behind him, through the windows, the city lights glittered like dying stars. And I understood, with perfect clarity, that nothing would ever be safe again. The penthouse had become a cage, but it was a cage with Matteo in it, and I was learning that was worth something. The Delacroix threat had forced a lockdown that neither of us was willing to break. I existed in a liminal space between security briefings and sleepless nights, caught between Matteo's protective fury and my own spiraling terror. The city outside the windows felt like a separate planet, one where people had normal lives and didn't wake up thinking about which enemy might strike first. 3 days of this. 3 days of watching Matteo move through rooms like a predator caging itself, of listening to him take calls where he discussed strategy and death, with the same tone he used to order coffee. 3 days of the pressure building between us until the air felt physically compressed. On the 4th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I found him in his study, standing at the window, looking down at the city like he was calculating the exact price of everything below. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand and blood under his fingernails from somewhere he'd been. He never fully explained these absences, and I'd stopped asking. "How much longer?" I asked quietly. He didn't turn around. "Until Delacroix makes a move or until I strike first. Either way, it ends in the next 72 hours. And then you get your life back." I walked closer to him, close enough that I could smell the blood and gunpowder, and that dark cologne that had become the scent of him in my body's chemistry. "What if I don't want it back?" That made him turn. His eyes were dangerous in the low light, burning with something that looked like madness mixed with hunger. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." I moved closer until we were separated by less than breath. "I'm saying I don't want to go back to that gallery and pretend to organize paintings while forgetting that I've seen into the darkest parts of you. I'm saying I'm terrified and angry, and absolutely certain that you're going to destroy me, and I'm saying I want you to do it anyway." His hand came up to my throat, not choking, just holding, just asserting his right to control even this. "You're in shock. You're experiencing Stockholm Syndrome. Stop," I interrupted. "Stop rationalizing. Stop protecting. Just..." I swallowed against his palm. "Just be with me. Just be the person you actually are instead of the version of yourself that's constantly worried about getting me killed." His eyes searched mine for something evidence of truth, maybe, or justification for what he wanted to do anyway. Then his other hand was in my hair, pulling gently, tilting my face upward, and his mouth was on mine with the kind of intensity that felt like surrender from both sides. This wasn't like the kiss in his study. This was raw. This was a man who'd spent weeks restraining himself, finally letting the restraints shatter. His hands moved down my body with singular focus, cataloging every inch like he was committing me to memory. His shirt came off first, not the controlled undressing of before, but urgent, impatient, like his skin burning required air. "Tell me you're sure," he growled against my neck, his mouth tracing the line of my shoulder. "I'm sure," I whispered. He carried me to the couch, laying me down with surprising gentleness, given the violence in his eyes. Every touch was a conversation without words, questions, and answers written in skin and breath. His hands mapped the geography of my body like he was claiming territory, and I realized that's exactly what he was doing. "Mine," his touch said. "You're mine now. All consequences accepted. If anyone ever tries to take you," he whispered against my collarbone, "I'll burn the city to ashes. I'll make them beg for death. I silenced him by pulling his face to mine, kissing him with everything I'd been holding back. The fear transformed into something else, into need, into hunger, into a desire that matched his own. When he entered me, it felt like a vow, like a contract written in sweat and heat, and the desperate collision of two people who understood they were dooming themselves but couldn't find it in themselves to care. "Bella," he breathed, his forehead against mine, moving slowly in a way that contradicted every violent thing about him. "You feel like salvation and damnation in equal measure." I wrapped myself around him, arms, legs, everything holding him close, like I could keep him inside me permanently, like if I held tight enough, the real world couldn't touch us. Afterward, we lay tangled on his expensive couch, and he traced patterns on my skin that matched the ones on his chest. Scars connecting to scars, wounds recognizing kindred wounds. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, his voice rough from what we'd just done, "about why the Delacroix family really started this. They weren't trying to move in on my territory. That was a cover story for the newspapers and the feds. They came for you specifically." I propped myself up on my elbow, studying his face. "What do you mean?" "Your ex-fiancé. His father is connected to the Delacroix organization. When Dominic realized you were with me, he told his family. They thought they could use you as leverage, manipulate me into stepping back. They didn't count on the fact that you'd matter this much." The betrayal hit differently than I expected. Not shock, exactly. More like confirmation of something I'd already suspected, that there were no innocent people in this world, that everyone connected to Matteo was complicit in some way. "So Dominic is already being handled," Matteo said flatly. "But that's not what matters. What matters is understanding that you can't go back, Sienna. Not to the gallery, not to that life. You're marked now. You're mine, and that means you're either protected or you're dead. Those are the only options. The darkness of that statement should have terrified me. Instead, I kissed him again, sealing myself into whatever future we were hurtling toward. I found the letter in his study, which is ridiculous because I had no reason to be looking through his things. No justification for invading that last space of privacy he'd offered me. But I was looking for something else, a pen he'd mentioned needing, and I found it instead. A photograph, slipped between pages of Dante's Inferno. It was Matteo, maybe 10 years younger, standing beside a woman. Not just any woman, a woman with his exact eyes, his exact bone structure, his exact expression when she smiled. The back of the photo read, "Maria and Matteo, before everything changed." I shouldn't have recognized the date written beneath it in the same handwriting as his study annotations, but I did. 17 years ago. The year before Matteo had taken over his family's organization, the year his father had died. I was still holding the photograph when he came in. His body went utterly still. I watched the calculation happen in his eyes, the decision between lying and honesty, between controlling the narrative and letting me see the truth. He chose truth. Her name was Maria, he said quietly, moving toward me not to take the photograph but to stand beside me, looking at it. My sister. She was 22. I was 28. Was? I whispered. The Delacroix family took her. They wanted leverage against my father. But my father was already dying. Cancer had hollowed him out so completely that he barely recognized me. I was in the process of becoming what he'd raised me to be. And Maria. He trailed off, and I saw his hands clench. Maria was good. She was the mercy in our family. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted a life that didn't involve blood and empire. I didn't want to know the rest. I absolutely had to know the rest. What happened to her? They sent back pieces, he said, his voice completely flat. Fingers first. Then, he stopped, collected himself. I got her back when she was barely recognizable. The medical examiners said they were surprised she'd survived that long. I felt physically ill. Matteo. The Delacroix family didn't just move in on my territory, Sienna. That was never what this was about. They came for you specifically because they wanted to see if history repeats itself. They wanted to see if I'd lose the same war twice. They wanted to prove that no matter how much power I accumulated, I still couldn't protect what mattered. The implications crashed down on me like an avalanche. Is that what I am to you? A chance to rewrite history? No. The word was absolute, violent almost. Maria was my sister. He stopped, struggling for words. You're the first thing in my adult life that I want for myself instead of for the empire. That makes you exponentially more dangerous. So you're saying this is strategic, I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. I'm saying I lied to you, he interrupted, and the admission seemed to cost him something physical. About when I knew you were coming to the penthouse that first time. I didn't find you by accident. I had you investigated months ago. The room tilted. Your gallery was struggling, he continued, his words clinical now, detached. Your engagement was falling apart. You were vulnerable. And I saw something in you that reminded me of Maria, this core of goodness that the world hadn't managed to destroy yet. I wanted to protect that, or I wanted to corrupt it. I'm still not entirely sure which. You orchestrated everything, I breathed. The restaurant, the seat, I couldn't finish. The falling into bed with you? Yes and no. I engineered the opportunity. You made the choice to take it. But the fact that I engineered it changes the nature of the choice, doesn't it? It makes you a puppet dancing on strings you didn't know were there. I felt myself fragmenting. Felt the walls of the penthouse closing in. Why are you telling me this now? Because Dominic showed up at one of my legitimate businesses today, absolutely terrified and requesting a meeting. He told me something that you need to know. Something about your family that you don't know about yourself. What? I demanded, my voice cracking. Matteo retrieved a folder from inside the safe behind the portrait. When he opened it, I saw documents, financial records, birth certificates, a photograph of my mother, decades younger, with a man who was distinctly not my father. Your mother had an affair when she was married to your father, Matteo said quietly. It was brief. It ended when she got pregnant. But the man she was involved with was Lorenzo Delacroix. Your biological father, Sienna, is connected to the family that just tried to use you to destroy me. The words didn't make sense. They rearranged themselves in my mind and still didn't make sense. My father is dead. He died before you were born, but his family knew about you. Dominic's family knew about you. And when they found out you were connected to me, they realized the exquisite irony of their position, that they could potentially use the biological granddaughter of their patriarch as leverage against the man who destroyed their operations. I sat down very slowly on the edge of the desk. Did you know? Before you saw me in the restaurant? Yes. The single word was an avalanche. You knew I had Delacroix blood, and you approached me anyway. I approached you because having Delacroix blood made you a bridge, a potential tool to end this war without further bloodshed. And because you were magnificent and terrified and I was selfish enough to want you despite all of it, I stood up, moving away from him. So everything, all of this has been manipulation, has been strategy. No, he said, and his voice broke in a way I'd never heard before. Everything about how I feel is real. Everything about wanting you, protecting you, choosing you over empire, all of that is catastrophically real. But yes, the beginning was strategy. And I'm a coward for not telling you sooner. I looked at this man who'd stripped himself bare for me, who'd shown me the darkest corners of his soul, and I realized that we were both casualties of a war that had started long before we met. And the worst part was that it didn't matter. Even knowing all of this, even understanding that I'd been played, I still wanted him. That made me either the most devoted lover in Vesper Bay, or the most delusional, possibly both. The warehouse sat on the edge of Vesper Bay, like something that had been abandoned before I was born. Matteo had insisted on taking me with him to what he called the conclusion. I'd protested, argued, threatened to leave the penthouse entirely if he didn't let me go. So here I was, watching from the shadows while my lover prepared to dismantle an empire. The Delacroix family had called a meeting, a formal one, bound by old code that supposedly meant weapons had to be checked at the door, and no blood spilled within the warehouse walls. It was a relic of a time when organized crime had rules, rituals, a kind of honor among thieves. Matteo had always hated those rituals. I watched from an elevated catwalk as the family arrived, men in expensive suits, some of them ancient, carrying the weight of generations of violence. Matteo stood at the center of the warehouse floor, alone, dressed in black, with absolutely no security visible, which meant his security was everywhere, hidden in rafters and shadows and corners I couldn't see. The head of the Delacroix family was a man named Henri, who had to be in his 80s. He wheezed when he walked, and his hands shook. And yet the moment he stepped into the warehouse, he commanded respect through sheer accumulated violence. Rousseau. Henri's voice was paper-thin, but heavy with authority. You've come to negotiate. I've come to end this. Matteo replied simply. Then we have terms to discuss. The girl. She has value to us beyond what you understand. Her blood. Her blood doesn't matter. Matteo interrupted. Because from this moment forward, she's not available. She's marked. She's untouchable. And anyone who tries to touch her will experience a level of suffering that makes what happened to my sister look merciful. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop. You're threatening the Delacroix family? Henri's laugh was wet, rattling. You think one man, no matter how ruthless, can face our entire organization? Matteo smiled. It was the most dangerous expression I'd ever seen on his face. Then he raised his hand. The warehouse erupted. It was like watching a choreographed nightmare. Gunfire came from the rafters, from behind overturned crates, from every conceivable position. Delacroix soldiers screamed, fell, returned fire into the darkness. The warehouse became a symphony of violence, and Matteo moved through it like a dancer, like this was something he'd prepared for his entire life. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. When it was over, and it was shockingly quick, less than 4 minutes from start to finish, every Delacroix family member was either dead or dying. Blood painted the concrete in patterns that looked almost abstract. Bodies lay in positions of final surrender. Matteo hadn't fired a single shot. He'd orchestrated the massacre from the center, untouched, directing traffic like a conductor leading a symphony. Henri was one of the few still moving, crawling toward the exit with a gut wound that was clearly fatal. Matteo walked beside him, a gun hanging loosely in his hand. The Rousseau family thanks you for 70 years of territorial disputes, Matteo said conversationally, as if they weren't watching someone bleed out on concrete. Consider this the conclusion of our negotiations. He didn't shoot Henri. He let the old man crawl. Let him understand, with perfect clarity, that this wasn't a quick death. This was a message. This was Matteo showing Henri the kingdom he'd lost. Then he looked up at the catwalk where I was hidden. Come down, he called, and there was something in his voice that wasn't rage or triumph. It was devastation. It was the sound of a man who'd just proven exactly how monstrous he could be. and was watching to see if the woman he loved would flinch. I descended on unsteady legs, stepping over blood and bodies, and the scattered evidence of death. Every step felt like a choice. Every step felt like I was choosing him over my own humanity. When I reached him, he was covered in blood that wasn't his. His hand was still holding the gun, and his eyes were absolutely fathomless. "This is what I am," he said quietly, for my ears only. Not the philosophy, not the poetry, not the version of myself that exists in candlelit rooms. This is the truth of who I am, Sienna. This is the price of loving me. I looked around the warehouse at the evidence of absolute, unforgiving power, and then I looked back at him. "I know," I whispered. He studied my face like he was looking for judgment, for fear, for anything that would justify letting me go. And when he found only acceptance, something in his chest broke open. "I don't deserve you," he said. "No," I agreed, "but I think I deserve you. I think I've been broken in exactly the right way to fit around the broken parts of you." He pulled me against his blood-stained chest, and I let him, understanding that this moment surrounded by death, soaked in the consequences of his absolute dominion, was the real marriage. This was the true binding. "I'll protect you," he promised, his voice hoarse. "I know. I'll kill anyone who threatens you. I know. I'll never be able to give you normal." "Good," I said, pulling back just far enough to look at him. "Because I've learned that normal is just a story people tell themselves when they're too afraid to want the real thing." He kissed me, right there in the warehouse, surrounded by the casualties of his empire, and it felt like a prophecy. Everything that came next was inevitable. I started having nightmares exactly 3 weeks after the warehouse. Not about the blood, though there was plenty of that imagery. The nightmares were worse. They were about who I was becoming. They were about me, standing in a red dress, ordering executions. They were about the moment I stopped being Sienna the art curator and became Sienna the mafia wife, fully invested in the machinery of violence. Matteo would hold me through them, but I could feel the distance widening. Every time I woke screaming, I could sense him pulling back slightly, recognizing that he'd fundamentally corrupted something in me that couldn't be restored. "I need to know if this is real," I said one morning, standing on the balcony of the penthouse, watching the city wake up. "If any of this is real." He was still in bed, watching me with those inscrutable eyes. "What do you mean? I mean, was any of it organic? Or was I always the play? Was I the move on the board that you calculated 17 years ago when you were becoming whoever this is?" "Sienna, don't," I interrupted. "Don't use my name like that. Like saying it softly will make the question go away. I need to know if I love you, or if I love the idea of you. I need to know if I'm choosing this or if I'm a victim of an extraordinarily sophisticated manipulation." He got out of bed, pulling on boxers, coming to stand beside me. The city was his kingdom. Every street, every building, every interaction between its inhabitants happened with his implicit permission. "You're asking me if you have agency," he said finally. "And the answer is yes and no." Yes. Because every choice you've made since that first night has been your authentic choice. No, because I created the circumstances that made you want to make those choices. I orchestrated the vulnerability. I engineered your need for rescue. By having my ex-fiancé's family threaten me? No. That was organic, though I accelerated the timeline. I knew Dominic would go running to his family eventually. I just made sure it happened when you were already emotionally invested in me. The honesty was devastating. "And the photograph?" I pressed. "The revelation about my parentage? Also timed," he admitted. "I knew about your father before I ever approached you. It was insurance, a way to explain away the threat without it seeming coordinated. A way to make you feel like you had a deeper connection to this world than just me." I turned away from the view, away from the city, away from him. "So what's real?" "This," he said, and I heard him move toward me. "This moment. The way I feel when you're not in the same room as me. The fact that I've stopped sleeping because I'm terrified you'll make a rational decision and leave, and I won't be able to let you." I looked at him, really looked at him. His hair was long, untrimmed from the chaos of the past weeks. He had dark circles under his eyes. His body had the lean, deprived look of someone not eating properly. He looked like a man falling apart, and I was the reason. "I'm ruining you," I whispered. "Yes," he agreed simply. "In the best possible way. The man I was before you was efficient and empty. The man I am now is falling apart and full. I'd take ruination from you over perfection without you." I can't promise I'll stay, I said, and the admission felt like betrayal and truth simultaneously. I don't know how to be this person. I don't know how to order someone's death over breakfast, and then go to charity galas and pretend I'm not covered in blood. I'm not like you, Matteo. I'm not built for this. I know. So what are we doing? My voice cracked. What is this if you know I'm going to eventually break completely and need to leave? He was quiet for a long moment. And in that silence, I felt the weight of everything between us, the corpses, the empire, the absolute certainty that loving him was incompatible with remaining intact. We're living, he said finally. Right now, in this moment, knowing we might have an expiration date. We're being as real as possible in a situation that's fundamentally built on manipulation. That's all anyone ever gets, Sienna. That's all love ever is, a temporary mercy in a world that's designed to destroy us. That's depressing. It's honest. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the weight of my own moral compromise. There are people I don't even know who are dead because of me, because I fell into bed with a mafia boss without asking enough questions. Families that will never see their fathers again. Children that will grow up without... Stop, he said, and his voice carried the same dominance he used in boardrooms and warehouses. You don't get to carry that guilt. I don't allow it. You don't get to decide what I feel. No, he conceded. But I can ask you not to weaponize it against yourself. The Delacroix family was corrupt long before you existed. Their violence wasn't caused by you. It was ended because I finally had the leverage and the motivation to end it. You didn't cause that. You were the catalyst, but you're not responsible for the consequences of their choices. It sounded almost rational, except rationality had stopped being a useful tool the moment I walked into his penthouse. I need time, I said. Time to think about whether I can live with what I've become. His jaw clenched, but he nodded. Okay, that doesn't mean I'm leaving, I clarified. I'm not strong enough to leave, but it means I can't promise forever either. I'll take the uncertain promise, he said quietly. I'll take the temporary mercy. That's more than I deserve. He left me on the balcony, and I stood there as the city moved beneath me. Thousands of lives being lived in proximity to the violence we'd orchestrated, completely unaware that the machinery of their lives had been rearranged by two people figuring out if love could survive knowing the price of its own existence. By sunset, I still didn't have an answer. The attack came on a Tuesday, which felt almost insulting. Mondays you expected chaos. Tuesdays were supposed to be gentle, forgettable, the kind of day that disappeared in the weekly blur. Matteo had stepped out for 30 minutes. A business meeting, he'd said, was unimportant but necessary. I was in the library, reading poetry with absolutely no retention, when I heard the first explosion. The windows didn't break. The penthouse's security was sophisticated enough that the blast was muffled, contained, but the building shook. A terrible groaning sound echoed through the walls, and my survival instinct kicked in with absolute clarity. I ran toward the study, toward the safe, toward the emergency exit protocol Matteo had made me memorize weeks ago. But my legs didn't carry me far before the security system died entirely. The emergency lights flicked once, twice. Then darkness consumed everything. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, multiple sets. Coming from the access point that was supposed to be impossible to breach. My fingers found a letter opener on the study desk. It was pathetic, a tiny defense against what was clearly a coordinated assault, but it was something. The door opened. 3 men, armed, professional, not Delacroix, not anyone I recognized. They moved through the penthouse with the efficiency of people who'd planned this, studied the layout, trained for exactly this scenario. Sienna Russo? The first man asked. I didn't answer. I held the letter opener, and I hated myself for being stupid enough to think it would help. We're here on behalf of the Gavallone family, the man continued. We have a message for Matteo Russo. You're the message. The gun rose. Everything slowed. But the shot that came wasn't from them. It was from behind me, and it dropped the first man like his strings had been cut. I spun around to find Matteo standing in the darkness, a gun in each hand, and something in his expression that bordered on insane rage. Get down, he commanded, and I dropped immediately. The penthouse became a war zone. Gunfire echoed off walls, off ceilings, off the expensive furniture that probably cost more than my entire old apartment. Matteo moved like water, like smoke, like something that couldn't be killed because it had already transcended the vulnerability of flesh. 2 of the men fell. The third ran. Matteo didn't chase him. Instead, he pulled me up, checked me for injuries with hands that were shaking with adrenaline, and then his expression shifted into something terrified. "I have to leave," he said hoarsely. "The Gavalone family wouldn't strike unless they knew I'd be vulnerable. Someone's told them where I am, who you are, how to hurt me most effectively. We have minutes before reinforcements arrive. So we leave," I said. "No. You leave. I stay." "Absolutely not. Listen to me," he interrupted, gripping my face in his hands. "If I leave with you, they hunt us both. If I stay, if I consolidate power here, if I make it clear that attacking my penthouse is the last thing anyone does, then you become a less valuable target. Then you get a chance at a life that isn't constantly under threat. I'm not leaving you. You are. Because I'm ordering it. Because I love you enough to let you go. Because—" He stopped, listening to something I couldn't hear. His jaw clenched. "They're coming up the elevators. And the stairs. I've got maybe 2 minutes." He dragged me toward the kitchen, hitting a panel I didn't know existed. A passage opened, narrow and dark. "There's a service elevator through there. It comes out in the basement. My car is in the south corner, keys under the mat. You drive to the airport. You take the first flight anywhere. You build a new life. I'm not Sienna." He kissed me hard, desperately. "I'm not letting you argue with me. I'm not letting you throw away the chance to have a normal life, the chance to be happy, the chance to exist without waking up thinking about which enemy might strike next. I want that for you more than I want anything else. I want it more than I want to breathe. Then come with me. I can't. They'll follow if I run. But if I stand here, if I face this, if I make it catastrophically clear what happens to anyone who threatens what's mine, then they stop. They decide I'm not worth the cost." Footsteps were loud now, just beyond the main entrance. His security was holding the line, but it was fracturing. "Go," he said, pushing me toward the passage. Now, I wanted to fight. I wanted to stay. I wanted to prove that I could love him without destroying myself in the process. Instead, I ran. The passage was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for my shoulders. It descended at a steep angle, and I moved blind through the darkness, my hands touching concrete walls slick with moisture. Behind me, I heard gunfire become muffled, then silent. I didn't let myself think about what that silence meant. The basement was cold and smelled like oil. The car was where he'd said it would be. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys. But I managed to get the engine running, managed to navigate out of the parking structure, managed to drive through Vesper Bay's streets like my world wasn't burning behind me. At a red light, 3 blocks away from the penthouse, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the glow of fire lighting up the night sky. The penthouse was burning. The entire top of the building was becoming an inferno. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "He's still alive, for now. But the price of your safety is his war. He's at war with everyone, Bella, and the only way to end it is for you to disappear so thoroughly that you're not worth the cost of finding." I understood, with perfect clarity, what that meant. It meant loving him meant vanishing. It meant the only way to save him was to erase myself from his life so completely that I became a ghost, a memory, something that was no longer worth pursuing. I set the phone down on the passenger seat, and I drove toward the airport, toward a future where I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed. 6 months. I'd built a new life in Portland, Oregon. Portland because it was far enough from Vesper Bay to feel like a different world, but close enough that I could pretend I wasn't running, just relocating. I'd gotten a job at a small museum, taken a modest apartment, created a routine where some days I didn't think about Matteo more than a dozen times. Progress. But the city was flooding with rain the night he found me. I was walking home from the museum, my bag heavy with grant proposals I was working on, my mind halfway through planning an exhibition on Renaissance painting, when I felt the presence before I saw him. That gravitational pull that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with fate. He was standing under a streetlight, soaked through, looking like something that had survived a war and lost. His left arm was in a sling. A scar that hadn't been there before traced his right temple, and his eyes, when he looked at me, they held a devastation so complete it made me want to fall to my knees. "I told you to disappear," I said, stopping about 10 feet away. Distance, safety, a buffer that might keep me from doing something catastrophic like falling back into him. "I did," he said. "For a month, I let you get ahead of me. I let you build a life. And then I realized something." He took a step forward, and I forced myself not to step back. I realized that protecting you by erasing myself was just another form of selfish manipulation. It was me deciding, again, what was best for you without asking. It was me playing God with your life again. Matteo, let me finish, he said, and there was a tremor in his voice that I'd never heard before. The Gavallone family is gone, consolidated into Russo operations or displaced entirely. The war is over, and the cost was exactly what we expected. Blood, violence, death. But it's done. And I'm not the same person anymore, Sienna. I'm worse and better simultaneously. How are you worse? Because I'll kill anyone who tries to separate us again. Because I've crossed lines I didn't think I could cross. Because loving you has made me more dangerous, not less. He took another step closer. But I'm better because you're the only thing I think about. Because I've started reading your poetry instead of mine. Because every decision I make is filtered through the lens of, will this matter to Sienna? You've fundamentally altered my brain chemistry, and I'm not even sorry about it. He pulled a small box from his jacket. It was soaked through, the velvet probably ruined, but he opened it anyway. The ring inside was beautiful, simple platinum with a diamond that caught the streetlight like captured starlight. I'm not asking you to come back to Vesper Bay, he continued. I'm not asking you to be the Mafia wife. I'm asking you to marry me, knowing exactly who I am, knowing exactly what loving me means. I'm asking you to choose consciously and completely, with all information presented and understood. This is still manipulation, I said. But my voice was shaking. You're still controlling the narrative. You're still... Yes, he agreed. I'll probably always manipulate to some degree. It's part of my personality architecture. But I'm asking you to call me on it. I'm asking you to stay angry. I'm asking you to never stop questioning whether you're being used, because that questioning keeps me honest. And if I say no? His expression shattered. Then I go back to Vesper Bay and spend the rest of my life being successful and empty, and occasionally remembering what it felt like when you looked at me like I was worth saving. The rain was pouring down harder. My hair was plastered to my face. His clothes were soaked through, and he was shaking with cold or emotion, or both. I'm terrified, I admitted. I'm terrified that I've changed in fundamental ways that you won't like. I'm terrified that you'll get bored with the safe version of me that exists here in Portland. I'm terrified that going back means I'll become someone I don't recognize. I know, he said. I'm terrified too. That's how I know this is real. That's how I know it's not strategy anymore. Real love is terrifying because it's voluntary. It's a choice you make every single day, knowing you could walk away but choosing not to. He took another step closer, closing the distance to nothing. Choose not to walk away, Sienna. Choose me. Choose us. Choose the darkness and the poetry and the terrible, beautiful, catastrophic love that I have for you. I looked at this man who'd orchestrated my life, who'd lied to me, who'd shown me violence and corruption and the absolute limits of human cruelty. I looked at the scars on his face and the vulnerability in his eyes, and I understood something profound. Loving him wasn't about approval or acceptance. It was about bearing witness to his truth and being willing to be bearing witness anyway. Yes, I whispered. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll go back. Yes, I'll be the version of myself that exists only because of you. I stepped forward into his arms, ignoring the rain, ignoring the cold, ignoring every rational argument against this decision. But you have to promise me something. Anything. You have to promise that you'll let me leave again, if it ever becomes too much. You have to promise that your love won't be another cage. He pulled back just far enough to look at me. I promise. And if you ever ask me to let you go, I will. It will destroy me, but I will. He meant it. I could see it in the absolute certainty of his expression. So I kissed him, there in the rain on a Portland street, and I sealed myself to whatever future we were building. I kissed him like I was drowning, and he was the only way to breathe. I kissed him like this was the only honest thing I'd ever done. When we broke apart, he slipped the ring on my finger. It fit perfectly, of course it did. He probably had my measurements, my ring size, my entire anatomical blueprint memorized before we ever met. Come back with me, he said. Come back to Vesper Bay. Come back home. I didn't correct him when he called it home, because I'd learned, over the past 6 months, that home wasn't a place. Home was whatever dark, dangerous, utterly consuming orbit I revolved around. And I was ready to return. The wedding was held in the Russo estate, a mansion so vast it contained its own chapel, its own gardens, its own weather patterns depending on which wing you occupied. I wore white because Matteo wanted that aesthetic. The juxtaposition of purity against the corruption of everything surrounding it appealed to his complicated sensibilities. But under the dress, I wore lingerie that was entirely for him, and that contradiction felt appropriate. Isla was my maid of honor, looking terrified the entire ceremony. Dominic didn't attend. He disappeared 3 months ago, probably relocated by his family to somewhere far from Vesper Bay and Matteo's considerably dark sense of humor about people who betrayed him. The ceremony itself was conducted by a priest who clearly understood he was officiating at the marriage of a man who trafficked in death. He kept his words brief and his eyes closed, like not looking directly at the situation would make him less complicit. The vows were ours alone, unwritten, delivered in a chapel that had probably witnessed 1,000 betrayals and reconciliations. "I promise to love you despite my better judgment," Matteo said, and I realized he was using the space to be honest in ways he couldn't be anywhere else. "I promise to hurt you sometimes because protecting you and hurting you are the same action in my world. I promise to be as good as I can be, knowing that my good will still look like evil to people who don't understand that survival in darkness requires becoming something dark yourself." My turn. "I promise to stay," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I promise to keep choosing you, knowing that you'll sometimes choose violence before mercy. I promise to hold you accountable and myself accountable simultaneously. I promise to build a life with you that's strange and complicated and absolutely ours." The priest looked relieved when it was over. The reception was held in the ballrooms, yes, plural, with Vesper Bay's entire underworld in attendance. Families that had warred with the Russos for generations, now careful allies or careful enemies, all present to witness the consolidation of power that my marriage represented. I'd become the symbol of Matteo's ability to transform even love into empire. "It's strange," Isla whispered as we watched people dance and drink and make their careful negotiations. "A year ago, you were engaged to Dominic and planning a garden wedding with his mother's friends. Now you're married to a mafia boss in a mansion that probably has bodies buried in the foundations. I'm not sure which version of myself I prefer," I admitted. "The one that was safe or the one that's real?" "You're happy, though," Isla observed. "I can see it. It's like he lit something on fire in you, and you're okay with burning." I looked across the ballroom to where Matteo stood, watching me with an intensity that made everything else fade. He was still dangerous, would probably always be dangerous, but he was also here, visible, choosing me in front of everyone who mattered in his world. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the staff had been dismissed, he took me to a room I'd never seen before. It was the library, his library. Every book he'd ever annotated, every story that had shaped his philosophy, they were all here, organized with meticulous care, and in the center of the room was a blank journal, leather-bound, with my initials embossed on the cover. "What's this?" I asked. "A place for you to write," he said quietly. "I spent so many years reading about how to be human, studying philosophy to understand my own darkness. But you're teaching me that humanity isn't about being good or evil. It's about being honest. I want you to document this. I want you to write down every moment where you question whether you've made a terrible choice. I want your doubt, your fear, your rage. I want the complete truth of loving someone like me." I opened the journal, running my fingers across the blank pages. All that potential. All that story waiting to be written. "I love you," I said. "Even though it terrifies me, even though loving you means becoming complicit in violence, even though it probably makes me morally bankrupt. I love you because of all that," he replied. "Because you're willing to be complicated. Because you see the darkness in me and choose to love it anyway. Because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be better, while accepting that I'll never be good." He pulled me toward the windows, and I could see Vesper Bay spread below us. All those lives, all that chaos, all of it spinning in the orbit of his power, and my love, and the dangerous chemistry between us. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair. "For what?" "For being the chaos that made everything else make sense. For being the thing that proved I was capable of more than destruction. For being my salvation and my doom in equal measure." "That's very romantic," I said, in a completely unhinged way. He laughed, and it was the most genuine sound I'd ever heard from him. No strategy, no performance. Just a man who'd found something worth breaking his own rules for. We made love on the floor of the library, surrounded by the written wisdom of philosophers who'd spent their lives trying to understand the human heart. And I understood, in that moment, that love wasn't supposed to be rational or safe or sensible. Love was supposed to be dangerous and real and true. Love was supposed to terrify you into becoming who you were always meant to be. And as Mateo whispered my name like it was prayer, like I was worth praying for, I finally accepted that I wasn't going to leave him. Not because I didn't have a choice, but because I did. Every day, I'd choose him. Choose the darkness. Choose the intensity. Choose the man who'd orchestrated his way into my heart and was intelligent enough to know that true power didn't come from control, but from being vulnerable enough to need someone. The morning after the wedding, I opened the journal he'd given me and wrote the first entry, Day 1 of Forever. I don't know if I'm the strongest woman alive or the most damaged. Probably both. But I'm here, in a mansion with a man who was supposed to destroy me, and I've never felt more whole. Maybe that's love. Maybe that's what happens when two broken people decide that their brokenness complements each other. He's reading poetry over breakfast. I'm about to walk into whatever comes next, and I'm not afraid anymore. Below the entry, Mateo had written in his elegant hand, "Not afraid? Perfect. Then we can finally begin."